Today, our discussion is going to be on why faithful church members are triggered by the church. And Mary Jo, in your book, Why I Still Believe, A Former Atheist Reckoning with the Bad Reputation Christians Give a Good God, you go into the hypocrisy of believers. Mm-hmm. And that kind of led to your doubt about Christianity as a worldview system. So tell us a little bit about how people's actions triggered you to doubt your faith.
Well, so I didn't know the word triggered back when I was going through this. But so what happened with me is that I had an expectation as I was coming into the church. So I didn't grow up Christian, and I'm exploring faith. I'm exploring what Christianity is about. I'm reading the Bible, and I'm seeing some really awesome things about God and his relationship to his people and how that is supposed to affect their lives. And especially when you look at the New Testament about, how Paul is engaging the churches and telling them how to treat one another. And John, the writings there, how we're supposed to love one another really greatly and be slow to anger and patient, all these wonderful things. I'm like, wow, this is really awesome. This is what I want. I want to be in a group that holds themselves accountable to this. Now, that's not the only reason why. So I don't want you to get that idea. Like, I was coming around to believe in God, but I was also really excited about this community of believers. And I sort of naively believed that people in the church would actually be people who were following these things that I was reading. And so when I became a believer and I entered into fellowship with the church, what I found out was that the church was just full of regular old people who were dealing with regular old problems. And the reason that Paul was making some of these admonitions was because these problems existed in the church. But what it did to me when I didn't have experience with the scriptures. I didn't have a lot of teaching. So I come into the church hoping to find the people who are searching for goodness, truth, and beauty in their own life.
Yeah.
And I find people who are in very much in normal patterns of hypocrisy, of professing the truth of God's word, but then, using it almost as a weapon against other people, and of being, using it to justify almost anything they want to be true, that they're comfortable with or that they believe, and not what I was expecting to find in the community of believers, of this graciousness and love. So so what I saw in the church was so opposite of what I expected to find in accordance with what I had read.
Right.
That it caused me to say, do any of the people who say they're Christian actually believe in God and believe that this is God's word? This is not the Bible, but believe
the fictitious Bible.
Usually have it right here, but do they actually believe that this is God's word? And I came to the conclusion that I didn't really think they did. I came to the conclusion that church was more like a social club, that maybe they had grown up doing this, or this was just something to do or whatever. But I didn't get a strong impression from generally. There's always one or two people that were really committed, but generally speaking, that Christians were committed to what they professed. And that hypocrisy caused me doubt about my faith. I developed an understanding that the leader was not allowed to be questioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as educators, we know that is a bad position to be in.
Oh, yeah. Because
the teacher should be making the environment conducive to where the student, even if it's adults, feel like they've got a voice, that they can come and say, hey, I had a question about this, or I disagreed with this, or I want to affirm this, good job on this. But a lot of times within churches and structures that are built in evangelical churches, it doesn't feel like you've got that freedom to do so.
Right. So what you're talking about in our education training is you want to create a safe environment. Mm-hmm. And then an environment that is conducive to student-owned learning.
Yes.
So, you don't want it to be like, just listen to me, I'm going to lecture, and that's that. You want people to take responsibility for the information that's being given. You want them to take it in, think on it, and really own it. And to do that, they actually have to be free to ask questions. They have to be free to make it their own. And that was something that we distinctly saw missing.
Right.
So,
and the best organizations I've seen have a council of people where the leader has has people he can bounce questions off of. And he really wants to know what's the pushback on this.
Yeah.
And so a leader that is strong like that and is willing to take criticism or critique or a nuance of some sort, those are the best leaders. But those that say, just listen to me and anything you have to say, I'm just going to nod my head but not really listen to you, that's what we're talking about. That's what triggers us big time.
What triggers me is when I say, "Oh, well, I don't really see it that way," and then they change the conversation or come after me. Well, it has to be. It has to be. I've heard that so many times, and I'm looking at them from the position of an educator, going, "Why does it have to be?
Exactly.
You're not God. You're not directly speaking. He's not like opening your mouth up and out comes himself, right? That's not who you are, unless that's what you're saying you are, and that's called narcissism."
Yeah.
Bing.
You went there. I love it.
did.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to go into our next segment, which is Patreon specific. So if you're not a patron, we invite you to do so. As an update, we now have 16 patrons on Patreon, which is great because we just started this back in January of this year. So it's growing slowly, but it is growing. And you can join us on Patreon for the next segment. The next segment, we're going to be talking about giving people space is to not be okay, giving people space to not be okay, and some other things too. So join us for that.